The right-wing Jewish Chronicle put out a hit piece of Andy Burnham claiming that he has thrown the Jewish community under the bus. Now, we already knew how deranged the Jewish Chronicle is, but they're not just going after pro-Palestine supporters anymore, but pro-Israel people who are marginally critical of the Israeli state. So let's go through some examples. Andy Burnham has been Prime Minister for exactly a week, and already a pattern has set in. It started with his choice of platform. Days before he had even taken office, Burnham declared that Labour had got it wrong on Gaza. Then, one of his very first interviews as incoming Prime Minister, posted through Lineker's own production company. Lineker is the man who left the BBC after sharing a Zionism post illustrated with a rat, imagery the Board of Deputies of British Jews called egregious, and which the campaign against anti-Semitism said should have seen him sacked outright. In that interview, Lineker described the war in Gaza as a genocide. So let me get this straight. The examples of so-called anti-Semitism or throwing Jews under the bus is because Andy Burnham was slightly critical of Labour's policy on Israel or on Gaza, and that he was interviewed by Gary Lineker, who shared a video years ago. I remember this video. It was a video critical of Zionism, which is fair. And in the corner, there was a small little rat. And he said, look, I'm sorry, I didn't see that image in the corner. I wasn't really focusing on that. I was focusing on the message of it, which is important. And then they try and use the fact that Gary Lineker says that Gaza is a genocide, means what? Labour are throwing Jews under the bus. And in that article, they've got genocide in quotations. Let's go to another. This week, Andy Slaughter, Labour MP for Hammersmith for over 2 decades, was appointed Solicitor General, a role with direct oversight of the Crown Prosecution Service's prosecutions of terrorism, hate crime, and anti-Semitism. According to the Daily Mail, in 2010, Slaughter posed for photographs with Hamas associates in Ramallah alongside Jeremy Corbyn. And in 2015, he was alleged to have agreed with the proposition that Israel fabricates and invents reasons to kill Palestinians. We posed with members of Hamas. So fucking what? Because guess what? Politicians in this country, they pose with Israeli ministers. They pose with prime ministers of Israel. And guess what? Israel is a terrorist state. The IDF are terrorists. Israel has killed far more than Hamas has ever killed. So you want me to be outraged that politicians have met with people who you disagree with? That's how negotiations work. But it's fine to pose with Israeli politicians. Complete crap. Now, the idea that Andy Slaughter says that, well, Israel fabricates and invents reasons to kill Palestinians is apparently rubbish, and it, again, is evidence that Labour are throwing Jews under the bus. I mean, that's true. Israeli ministers literally say that, I mean, we've had for decades, and especially since the 7th of October, Israeli propaganda calling Palestinians everything. You know, you've had Israeli ministers basically say that all Palestinians are terrorists, even the babies. They say that Hamas is operating in hospitals, so they got an excuse to blow up hospitals. They lied to slaughter Gazans, so Andy Slaughter is completely right. But I suppose Andy's assessment of Israel fabricating reasons to kill Palestinians is becoming more and more outdated, because these days, Israeli ministers don't lie about Palestinians. They just openly admit their genocidal intent. They don't hide it anymore. Then there is Ali Milani, chair of the Labour Muslim Network, who worked closely with Burnham in the run-up to his leadership win and is, according to The Spectator, tipped for a communications role in Number 10. Milani has apologised for tweeting, as a teenager, that 9/11 was a false flag the US government knew of in advance, and for telling a Jewish critic online that a disagreement would cost you £1. #Jew. So the article admits that he was a teenager when he said that 9/11 was a false flag. Okay, but that doesn't prove anti-Semitism. I mean, how is a conspiracy theory about 9/11 in any way remotely connected to Jew hatred? Of course, there are conspiracies about Israel being behind it, but again, that's a conspiracy. It's not racist because Israel is a state. Unless, once again, the Jewish Chronicle is saying that Jewish people and the Israeli state are one and the same, which is anti-Semitic. Now, as for the #Jew comment, yes, that's obviously problematic. But how long ago was this? And I don't seem to remember the JC going after Steve Reed with his anti-Semitic remarks he made about Tory donor Richard Desmond, calling him a puppet master. But Reed is pro-Israel, so that's fine. Add Wes Streeting, barely 2 days into the job of Defence Secretary, telling the country he fears Israel has fallen short of British military standards in Gaza, a judgment the former Army Chief Richard Donat suggested that he was in no position to make, given that Streeting knows pretty much the square root of nothing about defence. I mean, I think that Wes Streeting doesn't know a lot about anything, but to say that, well, his judgment of Israel falling short is based on nothing is crazy. I mean, we've got so much evidence of the war crimes Israel and the IDF are committing. But the JC thinks that Labour are throwing Jews under the bus because Streeting said that Israel fell short on military standards. Fell short. The IDF have slaughtered babies, have slaughtered children, have raped Palestinian prisoners with knives, have raped Palestinian prisoners with dogs. I've not made that up. That is literally reported. You can go and find it yourself. Public information. But Wes Streeting saying, well, they've sort of fallen short of standards. The most milquetoast thing you can ever say. What universe do you have to be in to think that's in any way anti-Semitic? Now, the article goes on to attack Sadiq Khan, who recently correctly called Gaza a genocide and rightly said that Netanyahu is not welcome in London. Of course, Sadiq Khan is apparently another example of Labour's anti-Semitism under Andy Burnham. And Andy Burnham, right, his cabinet is full of pro-Israel figures. Ruth Anderson, she worked for Labour Friends of Israel. You've got the Jewish Labour Movement chair, Mike Katz. Jewish Labour Movement, right, pro-Israel group. Mike Katz is in there. Ian Austin, need I say any more? Jonathan Reynolds, he was the former chair of Labour Friends of Israel. You've got Hayden Munro. He worked for former MP Jim Murphy. And Jim Murphy was former LFI chair. Burnham's chief of staff, right, corporate lobbyist James Purnell, he also served as LFI chair. But because Israeli policy has been slightly criticised, and because Burnham was interviewed by Gary Lineker, who correctly calls Gaza a genocide, that means that Labour under Burnham is anti-Semitic? What? These Zionists are insane and delusional.